Hi, this is Remembering the Past with Corey Franklin, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. We're going to start out with an athlete tonight, and then we're going to do 3 moments in time. The athlete we're going to start out with is Chuck Muncie, who is one of the great running backs in the NFL, but he's also one of the great questions of what if. Chuck Muncie died recently at the age of 60. He was one of the great running backs in the Pac-10 when he played for Cal. He went into the NFL and became one of the great running backs there. He was big, strong, tall, tough, and fast. And he was one of the leading rushers in the history of the New Orleans Saints and in the San Diego Chargers. And he might have gone on to be one of the all-time greats, but he developed a cocaine problem that knocked him out of the NFL. His repeated arrests for cocaine possession and cocaine use sent him to prison for 17 months, but they probably saved his life and gave him a new perspective that allowed him to work with rehabilitating others and gave him an insight into drug use in the professional athlete. Here's an ESPN report on the death of Chuck Muncie.
Fans of the NFL from the 70s and 80s certainly remember running back Chuck Muncie. Played for 9 seasons with the Saints and Chargers, 3 times a Pro Bowler. Muncie has died at the age of 60. Adam Schefter reporting the cause of death was a heart attack. Muncie scored 74 touchdowns in his 9 seasons before his career was derailed by drug abuse. Muncie was a star wherever he played. He finished runner-up to Archie Griffin for the Heisman Trophy back in 1979, was the 3rd overall selection in the 1976 NFL Draft. He's 5th on both the New Orleans Saints and San Diego Chargers all-time rushing list. Chuck Muncie, dead at the age of 60.
That was a mistake there. He came in second in the Heisman Trophy voting in 1975 to Archie Griffin, and not in 1979. He turned out to be a better running back in the pros. He might have had a better season in 1975. Here's the University of California Athletic Department tape on Chuck Muncie.
The incomparable Chuck Muncie, 230 pounds of trouble for any defense. He virtually broke every California rushing, all-purpose running, and scoring marks in his 3-year stint at Cal. He gained 1,460 yards and 228 carries, the 3rd best single one-year performance by a Pac-8 player. His career statistics are just as impressive. Muncie gained a total of 3,052 yards rushing, the 4th best performance in Pac-8 history. The 9.7 running back averaged over 6 yards per carry. He also caught 39 passes for 392 yards last season. Muncie's other dimension is that he can pass when needed. 2 of the 3 passes he threw last year were good for touchdowns. Everybody's All-American, Muncie won the coveted Wiseman Award, Sports Magazine's College Player of the Year, Most Valuable Player in both the East-West Shrine and Japan Bowl.
As I said, he was just a superb athlete. His teammates were in awe of how he could perform so well and his talents, given that he would often come in after a night of partying. But as I also said, he was a very intelligent man, and here near the end of his life, you can hear him talk about the cocaine problem and what it did to his career.
You know, at my lowest point, when I was incarcerated in federal prison, I got busted, distributing, some cocaine, and ended up doing 17 months in a federal jail after my football career. Had a great football career, and then I'm in jail. And during that 17 months, you really got a little bit of time to reflect on your life. Something I really was proud of was my ability to play ball. I didn't work at it a lot. I probably had the worst practice habits there ever were, but I knew that I loved the game and I could perform. And so every time I touched the ball on a Sunday, it was a dream come true. Twice as much time partying. And that's the way it was in the 80s, especially in Southern California. You had the beach, you had San Diego, the most beautiful city in the world, beautiful women. Life was good, and life was a big party at the time. I mean, we were doing drugs the night before the game. Never did any for the game. Never got up and got high the morning of the game or anything like that. But night before, stay up 2, 3 in the morning, in your hotel room, watching TV and stuff, but, just doing the things that you shouldn't be doing all the time. I was very bitter. I was blaming other people a lot on my actions. And then, like I said, 17 months is a long time. And thank goodness I was where I was, to be able to deal with that and not have anybody to run to or any other excuse to go to or any other weak link that I had created by myself to go to. I had to deal with those things internally. It was just me to stick out a hand and help me get on my feet and get me pointed in the right direction. And that's my mission now, to reach out a hand to people and say, hey, come on, let's get up on your feet. A lot of people get knocked down a lot, and not everyone knows how to get back up. And every once in a while, you got to help someone get back up.
Chuck Muncie, a cautionary tale, but in his own way, a real inspiration to young athletes. We're going to move on now to our moment in time, and our moment in time is roughly the early 1960s. And we're going to make a brief mention of Christine White, who died recently at the age of 81. Christine White is known for two things. In the early 1950s, she was the typist for a show business agent in New York City, and that agent happened to represent a young man from Indiana, James Dean, and she became James Dean's girlfriend when they were in New York City at the actor's studio. She had a relatively undistinguished acting career, except for one moment in time in October of 1963. She played the wife to William Shatner in one of the most famous episodes of Twilight Zone, indeed one of the most famous television episodes in American history, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, where William Shatner sees a gremlin on the wing of a plane.
Portrait of a frightened man. Mr. Robert Wilson, 37, husband, father, and salesman on sick leave. Mr. Wilson has just been discharged from a sanitarium, where he spent the last 6 months recovering from a nervous breakdown, the onset of which took place on an evening not dissimilar to this one, on an airliner very much like the one in which Mr. Wilson is about to be flown home. The difference being that on that evening, half a year ago, Mr. Wilson's flight was terminated by the onslaught of his mental breakdown. Tonight, he's traveling all the way to his appointed destination, which, contrary to Mr. Wilson's plan, happens to be in the darkest corner of the Twilight Zone.
There are a number of reasons it's such a wonderful and memorable episode. The screenplay was written by the great screenwriter Richard Matheson, and it was directed by Richard Donner, who went on to do the Superman movies and became a great movie director. Those people who think William Shatner can't act don't know what they're talking about. In fact, he is one of our greatest, if not our greatest, television actor. It's a different skill than the movies, it's a different skill than the stage, and certainly he can't do what Marlon Brando could do. But then again, I'm not sure that Marlon Brando could do what he did. When you look at all the wonderful stuff William Shatner's done on TV, it's very hard to name someone who's done more, and he was wonderful in this role as the panic-stricken man who had just come out of the insane asylum and saw that gremlin on the plane. Here's the final scene with Christine White as they're taking him away in a straitjacket, and they pan away from the plane and then back to the wing where the plate has indeed been pulled off, as he said it was.
It's all right now, darling.
I know. But I'm the only one who does know. Right now.
John Landis remade that for the movies with John Lithgow, but he wasn't close to as good as William Shatner was. And that was Christine White, James Dean's girlfriend. We're going to move on now to another moment in time, and this is in 1964, in the early summer, Bethesda, Maryland, and Ken Venturi, who has just come back from an auto accident and some injuries to his wrist, wins the U.S. Open while suffering from heat exhaustion. Ken Venturi died recently at the age of 82, and listen to him tell the story of winning the 1964 U.S. Open.
And Venturi is just 2 behind. A 50-minute break between rounds seems to have refreshed Venturi. His drive beginning the final round is long and straight. Young Ray Floyd is playing with Ken. And Venturi makes the birdie 4. He goes into the lead, 1 stroke ahead of Jacobs. Venturi is walking slowly, almost painfully. As he nears a goal he's dreamed of all his life.
After I hit my tee shot, I know I hit it right down the middle because the marshal raised his hands, and that meant it's in the middle of the fairway. And that's when the ovation started. I took my 4-iron out, trying to play a little knockdown 3/4, and instead of the ball jumping left off the side of the hill, it jumped right and went in the bunker. So all I had to do now was just don't get in trouble, and you might have it won. And as I walked to it, I was just honoring and cherishing the moment, my walk to the 18th green. After I hit my bunker shot, I came up and I was about 12 feet from the hole. Now I'm looking at it, and Ray Floyd is by my side, and I lined up the putt, and the putt has to go maybe a little bit to the right. And I hit the putt, and then all of a sudden the ball turned left and went in the hole. And I couldn't believe it, and I took off my hat and raised up my arms and said, my God, I've won the Open. And when I went out to pick up my ball, I couldn't reach down, and Ray Floyd picked the ball out from the hole for me. Handed me the ball, and I looked up at a 21-year-old boy. He had tears in his eyes, and that's when I lost it too. And that's when I broke down. And walked off there, and it's a moment that I'll never forget. The ovation still went on and on until I signed my card. And I think about it, of all the years that I had my accident and the slump, what a comeback it was to be named the United States Open champion.
Venturi was named 1964 Sports Illustrated Sportsman of the Year. He was a great golfer, but he had to retire several years after that because of injuries. And then he went on to become one of the greatest golf broadcasters in American history. Like Pat Summerall, whose podcast we did a couple of weeks back, he's known more today for the broadcasting he did than for the sport he played. And just before he died, he was elected into the World Golf Hall of Fame. Here's a report by Jim Nance on Ken Venturi's career as part of his Hall of Fame induction.
Until tonight, June 20th, 1964, was the day that defined Ken Venturi. His victory that sweltering, suffocating afternoon at Congressional Country Club was one of the most memorable, emotional, and heroic triumphs this game has ever known. A 36-hole finale that he nearly never finished, and moreover, was even advised between rounds by a doctor that he was suffering heat stroke, and that if he continued to play, it could be fatal. Kenny told the doctor that day, "I've got nowhere else to go." So alas, he took slow, measured steps, the final 18 holes, even getting an assist and adding up his scorecard from Joe Dye, as Kenny was too disoriented at that point to add up the numbers. Since that historic day outside of Washington, D.C., Kenny has taken many slow, measured steps toward this ultimate coronation. His golf career was put on hold so that he could serve his country first. He was in the Army, in Korea, and then Austria near the Russian border. And after leaving the military, he came closer to winning the Masters than any amateur ever has, holding the 54-hole lead in 1956. Still an amateur, there was the match at Cypress Point, teaming with Harvey Ward that famous day against Nelson and Hogan.
Venturi has the honors and is after his 10th consecutive tournament round in the 60s.
Once out on tour, he won in his first start in St. Paul. There would be 14 victories in all in a very short playing career.
Ken Venturi, playing his first tournament after a several-month layoff because of an unusual circulatory illness.
Injuries crippled the length of his playing days, most notably carpal tunnel syndrome that reduced him to about a 10-year window. Those injuries led to his next life, where most of us knew him as the voice that documented so many of the most important golf tournaments we ever watched.
With us out on the course will be the 1964 United States Open champion and the 1964 Hartford Open champion, Ken Venturi.
His years of commentating made him not only the longest analyst in American television golf history, but the longest-running lead analyst we've ever had for any sport in our country's broadcast history. Great calls.
Let me tell you, if Gene Sauer made his for Berry to go to 17, why not Dickie Craig?
Got a chance.
Why not Dickie Craig? This is the Cinderella story. This is unbelievable.
He's going to have a hard time making five.
I'll tell you, I've seen it all today. This is unbelievable. Heartfelt emotion.
I've said many times, Pat, after the money is spent, the trophy lingers on, and the memory of that applause, Peter Jacobson will never forget.
His work in television was legendary, and the audience considered him their trusted friend. He's led a remarkable life, from captaining his country to a President's Cup victory in 2000, to just being the walking embodiment of the sport and all its virtues. So tonight we honor the son of Fred and Ethel, the father of Matt and Tim, husband of Kathleen, with a recognition that I know means the world to him.
The greatest reward in life is to be remembered, and thank you for remembering me. May God bless you, and may God bless America.
Ken Venturi, great golfer, great analyst, and great guy. See also if you can catch him in Tin Cup, that Kevin Costner golf movie. It's not as good as Caddyshack, but Ken Venturi does a good job in it. We're going to close with our final moment in time in the early 60s before the Kennedy assassination with Billy Sol Estes, who died recently at the age of 85. Billy Sol came from the West Texas Abilene area, and then he moved out to Pecos, and he was the consummate swindler con man. He created the greatest con scandal of the Kennedy administration. His greatest gift was his downfall. He was a brilliant salesman. Basically, he could sell anything to anybody, and he had all sorts of cons running down in West Texas. He made millions and millions of dollars, and he co-opted numerous local politicians, and then, with the help of Lyndon Johnson, he moved on the national stage. He realized that many of the government programs of the 1950s and early 1960s benefited wealthy people more than they benefited poor people, and that helped him finance bigger and bigger cons. He would have been successful if he stayed honest. He was a millionaire before he was 30. He was named one of the 10 outstanding young businessmen in the United States in the 1950s, but there was something about him, he just couldn't let it go. The scandal that finally got him busted was some complex thing that involved ammonia fertilizer tanks that didn't exist. But he was basically paying off huge numbers of politicians, including some very high-level politicians, and he reported that he was paying off Lyndon Johnson. But he was also friends with the Kennedys. What ultimately probably brought about his downfall was that he made some powerful enemies in West Texas in the early 1960s. They reported him to the federal government. He assumed Lyndon Johnson would be at his side to protect him. But the Kennedys were torn between a scandal in their agriculture administration or stepping in to help someone who was a close confidant of Lyndon Johnson. And they decided not to help out Lyndon Johnson out of enmity towards him. And that meant that Lyndon Johnson, no fool, had to back away from Billy Sol Estes, and that was pretty much the end for him. Billy Sol never forgave Lyndon Johnson for turning on him and not protecting him when the feds came after him, but you can sort of understand where Lyndon Johnson was coming from. It was big news. Billy Sol Estes was front page news in the United States back in those days. He made the cover of Time magazine, and they wrote all kinds of songs about him. Folk music was big back in the early 60s, and the Chad Mitchell Trio wrote a song about Billy Sol.
Billy Sol Estes, we're proudly your son. You had to be Texan to do what you done. While other kids saved up their nickels and dimes for jelly beans, licorice, and fudge. Well, Billy saved too, and when he had enough, he bought him a federal judge. While still in his teens, he was very perplexed as to what field his fortune was in. His uncle suggested he go into steel, and that's just what Billy Boy did.
If you think that was big, Phil Oakes, who was a contemporary of the young Bob Dylan and became one of the great Vietnam War protest singers, sang a song about Billy Sol. Notice, by the way, they weren't shy about making fun of the Kennedy administration back in the early 1960s.
And now I'd like to say that crime sure doesn't pay, but if you want to make some money on the sly, well, you can always rent the U.S. government. It's the best fun that money can buy. And call Billy Sol, we don't know you at all. We've taken down your pictures from the wall. Well, we don't want to handle an agriculture scandal. We have got big elections in the fall.
Brilliant tragic figure, Phil Oakes. He's got a great story too. Maybe we'll talk about him someday. But if you were an American public figure in 1962-63, the pinnacle of public fame was to have this guy write a song about you, Alan Sherman. If Alan Sherman wrote about you, you had made it, whether it was because of fame or notoriety.
Oh, what have you done, Billy Sol, Billy Sol? Oh, what have you done, charming Billy? You took almost every cent from the U.S. government, which you spent on fertilizer, which is silly.
Yeah, in 1962, the name of Billy Sol Estes was familiar to basically every household in the United States, and now he's pretty much forgotten. He went to federal prison for a couple of years. He came out. He was a good old boy after that. Never got in too much trouble after that, but that's probably primarily because the politicians that he had bribed were all dead or were all in jail themselves. He was never too contrite, and he made all sorts of crazy claims about people and the Kennedy assassination and everything like that, but I think he was winking at the public with one eye. He was a world-class conman, and he knew that his name would forever be linked as the swindler extraordinaire during the Kennedy administration. Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer, Sid Tepps. As a final tribute to Billy Sol, he wore Buddy Holly-type horn-rimmed glasses, and Buddy Holly grew up in Lubbock, Texas, which is about a 3-hour drive from Pecos. Buddy Holly and Billy Sol Estes are sort of the yin and the yang of West Texas in the late 50s. So although I couldn't find anywhere, I have to believe that Billy Sol listened to a lot of Buddy Holly when he was conning people and bribing politicians. After Buddy Holly died, his backup group, the Crickets, took on a new member, Sonny Curtis. Great songwriter. A couple years later, he wrote the Mary Tyler Moore theme, but at the time he wrote a song for the Crickets that's better known today by Bobby Fuller 4. But here's the 1959 original by the Crickets, which embodies the life of Billy Sol Estes.
Well, breaking rocks in the hot sun. I fought the law and the law won. I fought the law and the law won. I miss my baby and good